Well, the book of Daniel is perhaps the most important prophetic book in the Old Testament. I doubt that if anyone would argue that. But this morning we're now in chapter 2. And so if you have your Bibles, how about you turn there with me to Daniel chapter 2. Ben, you don't happen to know what page that is on, do you? Well, the story is set in the heart of the most powerful empire of the time, the Babylonian Empire. And its ruler was Nebuchadnezzar II. He is the most important Gentile king in the Bible. He is mentioned 90 times, and 3 of those times, God refers to him as my servant, there in the book of Jeremiah. It was Nebuchadnezzar who built the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But history tells us that he was also a very brutal king. His subjects trembled before him, and he trembled before no one. Nothing that is except, as we're going to see, his dreams. Well, Daniel chapter 2 tells the story of God speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, and many believe that this is the most important dream recorded in the Bible because it predicts the future of 4 successive empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the question that often comes up is, well, why would God convey something so important to a pagan king, to a guy like Nebuchadnezzar? Well, the answer is because Nebuchadnezzar was the first king of what Jesus would call the times of the Gentiles. A period in which Israel would be dominated by the Gentile nations that would continue throughout the tribulation. And so Nebuchadnezzar's rule began a time that is still going on. And that's why he's so important. And though God used Nebuchadnezzar to communicate this prophecy, there was an irony involved. Its message was about the downfall of his own kingdom, as well as those that would follow him. Now the chapter, Daniel chapter 2, divides itself into 4 sections. The first 30 verses tell the story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Verses 31 to 36 record Daniel's revelation of that dream. Verses 37 to 45 give his interpretation of the dream. And then verses 46 to 49 tell of the king's appreciation. And so let's go ahead and begin with the first. The king's dream. If you remember, Daniel was taken to Babylon when he was about 14 years old. He completed 3 years of training and was added to the king's court. And so when this story takes place, he's not even 20 years old yet. Verse 1. Now in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Verse 2. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive gifts from me, and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. Now, Nebuchadnezzar must have had his doubts about his experts. So he wants proof that they're telling him the truth. They have to first describe the dream and then give the interpretation. If not, they'll be executed. And this was no idle threat. If you know the stories of what he did to King Zedekiah in 2 Kings, and to Daniel's 3 friends here in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar was ruthless. He had no qualms about carrying out such threats. Verse 7. They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command for me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh." Well, the advisors were right about one thing. There wasn't a man on earth who could do such a thing. And so notice what happens in verse 12. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar is done. He gives the command to execute all the wise men of Babylon. The King James suggests that the order is carried out immediately, while most modern translations tell us that it is about to take place. It's about to happen. And so while the Babylonian advisors are getting their affairs in order, Daniel and his friends, we're skipping ahead a little bit, they begin to pray. They know that God is their only hope. And God answers with both the revelation of the dream as well as its interpretation. And so let's continue. Jump down to verse 31. Verse 31, Daniel is now standing before the king. He is revealing what the king's dream was. And here's what he says, verse 31. "You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." Verse 34. "You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that there was not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." In his dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a statue of a man that illustrates the fate of the world. Okay, it isn't an image of all of history, but of the nations that are going to rule or have ruled Israel during the times of the Gentiles, until God's kingdom on earth is finally established. The word kingdom appears 9 times between verses 37 and 44. And so the message to Nebuchadnezzar is simple. God alone rules the kingdoms of the earth. He alone is the one who establishes and removes kings and presidents and dictators and all who are in authority. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the interpretation. The statue, we find out, is made up of 5 parts. Okay, you got the head of gold, the breast and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of bronze, the legs of iron, and the feet that are part iron and part clay. These 5 sections symbolize 5 empires, 4 of which have already come. You have Babylon, you have the Medes and the Persians, Greece, and then you have Rome, and then finally, 5th empire is going to be a revived version of the Roman Empire at the end of the age. And so the head of gold represented Nebuchadnezzar in the kingdom of Babylon, which began in 606 BC and lasted for 70 years until 536 BC. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Babylon, he wrote that never in all his life had he seen more gold. Babylon was often associated with its wealth in gold. Hence, the head is symbolized by a head of gold. Next, the chest and arms of silver represented the Medo-Persian Empire, which endured for more than 200 years, from 538 to 331 BC. It has 2 arms, representing the alliance between these 2 kingdoms, these 2 nations, the Medes and the Persians. Then, the belly and thighs of bronze, which represented the kingdom of Greece, under Philip of Macedon and his more famous son, Alexander the Great. Bronze symbolized this kingdom partly because Alexander, during his conquest, equipped his army with bronze helmets, bronze breastplates, bronze shields, and bronze swords. Now, while the Bible doesn't specifically identify Rome as the 4th empire, history indicates that this is the case. The Romans conquered Alexander's empire through what became known as the Iron Legs of Rome. H.C. Leopold writes, "The Roman legions were noted for their ability to crush all resistance with an iron heel. There is apparently little that is constructive in the program of this empire, in spite of Roman law and Roman roads and civilization, because the destructive work outweighed all else." End quote. Rome crushed and devoured everything in its path. Now, while some see the feet of iron and clay as representing the division of the Roman Empire, nothing in history corresponds to these 10 kings, these 10 toes that we're told about, which suggests that this kingdom is still future. But I want you to notice, there is a progressive deterioration of these kingdoms. John Wolford writes, "The descending scale of value of the 4 metals suggests the degeneration of the human race through the ages. This concept contradicts the evolutionist interpretation of human history. Instead of beginning in the dust and consummating in fine gold, God reveals mankind in the times of the Gentiles to begin with gold and then end in the dust." End quote. But while their value decreases, their strength increases. Increasing power and decreasing morality is always a bad combination. Such is the day that we are living in. But let's continue in verse 44. Daniel says, "In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy." Nebuchadnezzar's dream depicts the coming of Christ's kingdom. And he describes it with two images, the images of the stone and the image of the mountain. When the stone strikes the statue is completely destroyed, and the stone expands into a mountain that fills the earth. The stone represents, got your attention, the stone represents Jesus, the coming King. And the mountain represents his kingdom. And Daniel gives us 5 characteristics of his coming kingdom. First of all, it is going to be a supernatural kingdom. Twice we're told that it's a stone cut without hands, meaning it is a kingdom that is not man-made. It originates with God. Second, it'll be a sudden kingdom. It'll arrive with a decisive blow. Every passage that talks about the second coming of Christ describes it this way. It'll happen suddenly, in a blink of an eye. Third, it'll be a severe kingdom. All the previous kingdoms, what happens to them? They're destroyed. Fourth, it'll be a sovereign kingdom. It'll expand and fill the entire earth. At which time the prayer, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven," it'll finally be realized. And last but not least, it'll be a successful kingdom. Nations and empires come and go, but Christ's kingdom will endure forever. No kingdom will ever replace it. His kingdom will be what no others have ever been. It'll be supernatural, it'll be sudden, severe, sovereign. It will be successful. Well, what Nebuchadnezzar does next is nothing short of astounding. Verse 46, the story continues. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present to him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, 'Surely your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery.'" Verse 48, "Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon, while Daniel was at the king's court." Nebuchadnezzar falls to his knees and does homage to this Jewish boy, to a teenager not much older than Ben. Crazy, isn't it? Josephus records a similar instance when Alexander the Great bowed before the Jewish high priest. One of Alexander's generals, asked him why he would lower himself to a Jew, to which Alexander replied, "It wasn't before him that I prostrated myself, but the God whom he has the honor to be the high priest." Similarly, Nebuchadnezzar is not worshiping Daniel, but the God of Daniel. And then he promotes Daniel and gives him special authority over all these wise men, special authority there in the kingdom. But as we close this chapter, I want to share with you some final words from H.C. Leopold. Here's what he writes. He says, each new combination of forces or nations that has tried to achieve the result of a lasting kingdom invariably meets with the same overthrow. So history is a succession of defeats. But for the one who knows Almighty God, there is hope. He has a kingdom that will never be overthrown and will finally stand out as eternal and entirely successful. End quote. You know, today, we are living on the threshold of the age to come. We are there. We are waiting for that final stone. The days of mankind's rule is nearly over. It's almost time for the arrival of the stone cut without hands. And I tell you what, I'm looking forward to that day. And that should encourage us. Because Christ's kingdom is going to be far better than any the world has ever known. It will be a perfect kingdom. A kingdom not dominated with cruelty, war, bloodshed, greed. It'll be exactly what God intended. Bow with me as we close in a word of prayer.